2. Emerson. It has seemed to the writer that Emerson is greater, his identity more complete perhaps, in the realms of revelation, natural disclosure, than in those of poetry, philosophy, or prophecy. Though a great poet and prophet, he is greater possibly as an invader of the unknown, America's deepest explorer of the spiritual immensities, a seer painting his discoveries in masses and with any color that may lie at hand, cosmic, religious, human, even sensuous, a recorder freely describing the inevitable struggle in the soul's uprise, perceiving from this inward source alone that every ultimate fact is only the first of a new series, a discoverer whose heart knows, with Voltaire, quote, that man seriously reflects when left alone, end of quote, and would then discover, if he can, that, quote, wondrous chain which links the heavens with earth, the world of beings subject to one law, end of quote. In his reflections, Emerson, unlike Plato, is not afraid to ride Arion's dolphin and to go wherever he is carried, to Parnassus, or to, quote, Muscataquid, end of quote. We see him standing on a summit at the door of the infinite where many men do not care to climb, peering into the mysteries of life, contemplating the eternities, hurling back whatever he discovers there. Now thunderbolts for us to grasp, if we can, and translate, now placing quietly, even tenderly in our hands, things that we may see without effort. If we won't see them, so much the worse for us. We see him, a mountain guide, so intensely on the lookout for the trail of his star that he has no time to stop and retrace his footprints, which may often seem indistinct to his followers, who find it easier and perhaps safer to keep their eyes on the ground. And there is a chance that this guide could not always retrace his steps if he tried, and why should he? He is on the road, conscious only that, though his star may not lie within walking distance, he must reach it before his wagon can be hitched to it. A Prometheus illuminating a privilege of the gods, lighting a fuse that is laid towards men. Emerson reveals the less, not by an analysis of itself, but by bringing men towards the greater. He does not try to reveal personally, but leads rather to a field where revelation is a harvest part, where it is known by the perceptions of the soul towards the absolute law. He leads us towards this law, which is a realization of what experience has suggested and philosophy hoped for. Ouch. He leads us conscious that the aspects of truth as he sees them may change as often as truth remains constant. Revelation, perhaps, is but a prophecy intensified, the intensifying of its mason work as well as its steeple. Simple prophecy, while concerned with the past, reveals but the future, while revelation is concerned with all time. The power in Emerson's prophecy confuses it with, or at least makes it seem to approach, revelation. It is prophecy with no time element. Emerson tells, as few bards could, of what will happen in the past, for his future is eternity, and the past is a part of that. And so, like all true prophets, he is always modern and will grow modern with the years, for his substance is not relative, but a measure of eternal truths, determined rather by a universalist than by a partialist. He measured, as Michelangelo said true artists should, quote, with the eye and not the hand, end of quote. But to attribute modernism to his substance, though not to his expression, is an anachronism and as futile as calling today's sunset modern. As revelation and prophecy in their common acceptance are resolved by man from the absolute and universal to the relative and personal, and as Emerson's tendency is fundamentally the opposite, it is easier, safer and so apparently clearer to think of him as a poet of natural and revealed philosophy, and as such a prophet, but not one to be confused with those singing soothsayers whose pockets are filled, as are the pockets of conservative reaction and radical demagoguery and pulpit, street corner, bank and columns, with dogmatic fortune tellings. Emerson, as a prophet in these lower heights, was a conservative in that he seldom lost his head, and a radical in that he seldom cared whether he lost it or not. He was a born radical, as are all true conservatives. He was too much absorbed by the absolute, too much of the universal to be either, though he could be both at once. To Cotton Mather, he would have been a demagogue. To a real demagogue, he would not be understood, as was with no self-interest that he laid his hand on reality. As it was with no self-interest that he laid his hand on reality. The nearer any subject or an attribute of it approaches to the perfect truth at its base, the more does qualification become necessary. Radicalism must always qualify itself. Emerson clarifies as he qualifies by plunging into, rather than emerging from, Carlyle's soul-confusing labyrinths of speculative radicalism. The radicalism that we hear much about today is not Emerson's kind, but of thinner fiber. It qualifies itself by going to a, quote, root, end of quote, and often cutting other roots in the process. It is usually impotent as dynamite in its cause, and sometimes as harmful to the wholesome progress of all causes. It is qualified by its failure. But the radicalism of Emerson plunges to all roots. It becomes greater than itself, greater than all its formal or informal doctrines, too advanced and too conservative for any specific result, too Catholic for all the churches. For the nearer it is to truth, the farther it is from a truth, and the more it is qualified by its future possibilities. Hence comes the difficulty, the futility of attempting to fasten on Emerson any particular doctrine, philosophic or religious theory. Emerson wrings the neck of any law that would become exclusive and arrogant, whether a definite one of metaphysics or an indefinite one of mechanics. He hacks his way up and down as near as he can to the absolute, the oneness of all nature, both human and spiritual, and to God's benevolence. To him, the ultimate of a conception is its vastness, and it is probably this, rather than the blind spots in his expression, that makes us inclined to go with him but halfway and then stand and build dogmas. But if we cannot follow all the way, if we do not always clearly perceive the whole picture, we are at least free to imagine it. He makes us feel that we are free to do so. Perhaps that is the most he asks. For he is but reaching out through and beyond mankind, trying to see what he can of the infinite and its immensities, throwing back to us whatever he can, but ever conscious that he but occasionally catches a glimpse. Conscious that if he would contemplate the greater, he must wrestle with the lesser, even though it dims in outline. That he must struggle if he would hurl back anything, even a broken fragment for men to examine, and perchance in it find a germ of some part of truth. Conscious at times of the futility of his effort and its message, conscious of its vagueness, but ever hopeful for it, and confident that its foundation, if not its medium, is somewhere near the eventual absolute good, the divine truth underlying all life. If Emerson must be dubbed an optimist, then an optimist fighting pessimism but not wallowing in it. An optimist who does not study pessimism by learning to enjoy it, whose imagination is greater than his curiosity, whose seeing the signpost to Erebus is strong enough to go the other way. This strength of optimism, indeed the strength we find always underlying his tolerance, his radicalism, his searches, prophecies, and revelations, is heightened and made efficient by, quote, imagination penetrative, end of quote. A thing concerned not with the combining, but the apprehending of things. A possession akin to the power, Ruskin says, all great pictures have, which, quote, depends on the penetration of the imagination into the true nature of the thing represented, and on the scorn of the imagination for all shackles and fetters of mere external fact that stand in the way of its suggestiveness. End of quote. A possession which gives the strength of distance to his eyes and the strength of muscle to his soul. With this he slashes down through the loam, nor would he have us rest there. If we would dig deep enough only to plant a doctrine from one part of him, he would show us the quicksilver in that furrow. If we would creed his compensation, There is hardly a sentence that could not wreck it, or could not show that the idea is no tenet of a philosophy, but a clear, though perhaps not clearly hurled on the canvas, illustration of universal justice, of God's perfect balances, a story of the analogy, or better, the identity of polarity and duality in nature with that in morality. The essay is no more a doctrine than the law of gravitation is. If we should stop and attribute too much to genius, he shows us that what is best written or done by genius in the world was no one man's work, but came by wide social labor, when 1,000 wrought like one, sharing the same impulse. If we would find in his essay on Montaigne a biography, we are shown a biography of skepticism, and in reducing this to relation between sensation and the morals, we are shown a true Montaigne. We know the man better perhaps by this less presentation. If we would stop and trust heavily on the harvest of originality, he shows us that this plant, this part of the garden, is but a relative thing. It is dependent also on the richness that ages have put into the soil. Every thinker is retrospective. Thus is Emerson always beating down through the crust towards the first fire of life, of death, and of eternity. Read where you will, each sentence seems not to point to the next, but to the undercurrent of all. If you would label his a religion of ethics or of morals, he shames you at the outset. Quote, "For ethics is but a reflection of a divine personality," end of quote. All the religions this world has ever known have been but the aftermath of the ethics of one or another holy person. Quote, "As soon as character appears, be sure love will," end of quote. Quote, the intuition of the moral sentiment is but the insight of the perfection of the laws of the soul," end of quote. But these laws cannot be catalogued. If a versatilist, a modern Goethe for instance, could put all of Emerson's admonitions into practice, a constant permanence would result. An eternal short circuit, a focus of equal X-rays, even the value or success of but one precept is dependent, like that of a ball game, as much on the batting eye as on the pitching arm. The inactivity of permanence is what Emerson will not permit. He will not accept repose against the activity of truth. But this almost constant resolution of every insight towards the absolute may get a little on one's nerves if one is at all partial-wise to the specific. One begins to ask, what is the absolute anyway, and why try to look clear through the eternities and the unknowable even out of the other end? Emerson's fondness for flying to definite heights on indefinite wings and the tendency to over-resolve becomes unsatisfying to the impatient, who want results to come as they walk. Probably this is a reason that it is occasionally said that Emerson has no vital message for the rank and file. He has no definite message perhaps for the literal, but messages are all vital, as much by reason of his indefiniteness as in spite of it. There is a suggestion of irony in the thought that the power of his vague but compelling vitality, which ever sweeps us on in spite of ourselves, might not have been his if it had not been for those definite religious doctrines of the old New England theologians. For almost 2 centuries, Emerson's mental and spiritual muscles had been in training for him in the moral and intellectual contentions, a part of the religious exercise of his forebears. A kind of higher sensitiveness seems to culminate in him. It gives him a power of searching for a wider freedom of soul than theirs. The religion of Puritanism was based to a great extent on a search for the unknowable, limited only by the dogma of its theology, a search for a path so that the soul could better be conducted to the next world, while Emerson's transcendentalism was based on the wider search for the unknowable, unlimited in any way or by anything except the vast bounds of innate goodness, as it might be revealed to him in any phenomena of man, nature, or God. This distinction, tenuous, in spite of the definite-sounding words, we like to believe has something peculiar to Emerson in it. We like to feel that it superimposes the one that makes all transcendentalism but an intellectual state, based on the theory of innate ideas, the reality of thought and the necessity of its freedom. For the philosophy of the religion, or whatever you will call it, of the Concord Transcendentalists is, at least, more than an intellectual state. It has even some of the functions of the Puritan Church. It is a spiritual state in which both soul and mind can better conduct themselves in this world. and also in the next when the time comes. The search of the Puritan was rather along the path of logic, spiritualized, and the transcendentalist of reason, spiritualized. A difference in a broad sense between objective and subjective contemplation. The dislike of inactivity, repose, and barter drives one to the indefinite subjective. Emerson's lack of interest in permanence may cause him to present a subjectivity harsher on the outside than is essential. His very universalism occasionally seems a limitation. Somewhere here may lie a weakness, real to some, apparent to others. A weakness insofar as his relation becomes less vivid to the many, insofar as he over-disregards the personal unit in the universal. If genius is the most indebted, how much does it owe to those who would but do not easily ride with it? If there's a weakness here, is it the fault of substance or only of manner? If of the former, there is organic error somewhere, and Emerson will become less and less valuable to man. But this seems impossible, at least to us, without considering his manner or expression here. It forms this general subject of the second section of this paper. Let us ask if Emerson's substance needs an affinity, a supplement, or even a complement or a gangplank, and if so, of what will it be composed? Perhaps Emerson could not have risen to his own if it had not been for his Unitarian training and association with the churchmen emancipators. Quote, Christianity is founded on and supposes the authority of reason and cannot therefore oppose it without subverting itself, end of quote. Quote, its office is to discern universal truths, great and eternal principles, the highest power of the soul, end of quote. Thus preached Channing. Who knows but this pulpit aroused the younger Emerson to the possibilities of intuitive reasoning in spiritual realms. The influence of men like Channing in his fight for the dignity of human nature against the arbitrary revelations that Calvinism had strapped on the church, and for the belief in the divine and human reason doubtless encouraged Emerson in his unshackled search for the infinite, and gave him premises which he later took for granted instead of carrying them around with him. An over-interest, not an under-interest in Christian ideal aims, may have caused him to feel that the definite paths were well established in doing their share, and that for some to reach the same infinite ends, more paths might be opened, paths which would in themselves and in a more transcendent way partake of the spiritual nature of the land in quest, another expression of God's kingdom in man. Would you have the indefinite paths always supplemented by the shadow of the definite one of a first influence? A characteristic of rebellion is that its results are often deepest when the rebel breaks not from the worst to the greatest, but from the great to the greater. The youth of the rebel increases this characteristic. The innate rebellious spirit in young men is active and buoyant. They could rebel against and improve the millennium. This excess of enthusiasm at the inception of a movement causes loss of perspective, a natural tendency to undervalue the great and that which is being taken as a base of departure. A quote, youthful sedition, end of quote, of Emerson was his withdrawal from the communion, perhaps, the most socialistic doctrine, or rather symbol of the church, a, quote, commune, end of quote, above property or class. Picking up an essay on religion of a rather remarkable-minded boy, perhaps with a touch of genius, written when he was still in college, and so serving as a good illustration point, we read, quote, every thinking man knows that the church is dead, end of quote. But every thinking man knows that the church part of the church always has been dead, that part seen by candlelight, not Christ's light. Enthusiasm is restless and hasn't time to see that if the church holds itself as nothing but the symbol of the greater light, it is life itself. As a symbol of a symbol, it is dead. Many of the sincerest followers of Christ never heard of him. I'm going to reread that. That was just too good. Picking up an essay on religion of a rather remarkable-minded boy, perhaps with a touch of genius, written when he was still in college, and so serving as a good illustration and point, we read, quote, "Every thinking man knows that the church is dead," end of quote. But every thinking man knows that the church part of church always has been dead. That part seen by candlelight, not Christ light. Enthusiasm is restless and hasn't time to see that if the church holds itself as nothing but the symbol of the greater light, it is life itself. As a symbol of a symbol, it is dead. Many of the sincerest followers of Christ never heard of him. It is the better influence of an institution that arouses in the deep and earnest souls a feeling of rebellion to make its aims more certain. It is their very sincerity that causes these seekers for a freer vision to strike down for more fundamental, universal, and perfect truths, but with such feverish enthusiasm that they appear to overthink themselves. A subconscious way of going Godward, perhaps. The rebel of the 20th century says, "Let us discard God, immortality, miracle, but be not untrue to ourselves." Here he, no doubt, in a sincere and exalted moment, confuses God with a name. He apparently feels that there is a separable difference between natural and revealed religion. He mistakes the powers behind them to be fundamentally separate. In the excessive keenness of his search, he forgets that, quote, "being true to ourselves," end of quote, is God. That the faintest thought of immortality is God, and that God is miracle. Over-enthusiasm keeps one from letting a common experience of a day translate what is stirring the soul. The same inspiring force that arouses the young rebel brings later in life a kind of experience afterglow, a realization that the soul cannot discard or limit anything. Would you have the youthful enthusiasm of rebellion which Emerson carried beyond his youth, always supplemented by the shadow of experience? Perhaps it is not the narrow-minded alone that have no interest in anything but in its relation to their personality. Is the Christian religion, to which Emerson owes embryo ideals, anything but the revelation of God in a personality? A revelation so that the narrow mind could become opened. But the tendency to over-personalize personality may also have suggested to Emerson the necessity for more universal and impersonal paths, though they be indefinite of outline and vague of ascent. Could you journey with equal benefit if they were less so? Would you have the universal always supplemented by the shadow of the personal? If this view is accepted, and we doubt that it can be by the majority, Emerson's substance could well bear a supplement, perhaps an affinity, something that will support that which some conceive he does not offer, something that will help answer Alton Locke's question, quote, "What has Emerson for the working man?" end of quote, and questions of others who look for the gangplank before the ship comes in sight, something that will supply the definite banister to the infinite, which it is said he keeps invisible, something that will point a crossroad from his personal to his nature, something that may be in Thoreau or Wordsworth or in another poet whose songs, quote, "breathe of a new morning of a higher life, though a definite beauty in nature," end of quote, or something that will show the birth of his ideal and hold out a background of revealed religion as a perspective to his transcendent religion, a counterpoise in his rebellion, which we feel Channing or Dr. Bushnell or other saints known and unknown might supply. If the arc must be completed, if there are those who would have the great dim outlines of Emerson fulfilled, it is fortunate that there are Bushnells and Wordsworths to whom they may appeal, to say nothing of the Vedas, the Bible, or their own souls. But such possibilities and conceptions, the deeper they are received, the more they seem to reduce their need. Emerson's circle may be a better whole without its complement. Perhaps his unsatiable demand for unity, the need to recognize one nature in all variety of objects, would have been impaired if something should make it simpler for men to find the identity they at first want in his substance. Quote, "Draw if thou canst the mystic line severing rightly his from mine, which is human, which divine," end of quote. Whatever means one would use to personalize Emerson's natural revelation, whether by a vision or a boardwalk, the vastness of his aims and the dignity of his tolerance would doubtless cause him to accept, or at least try to accept, and use, quote, "magically as a part of his fortune," end of quote. He would modestly say, perhaps, quote, that the world is enlarged for him not by finding new objects, but by more affinities and potencies than those he already has, end of quote. But indeed, is not enough manifestation already there? Is not the asking that it be made more manifest forgetting that, quote, "we are not strong by our power to penetrate, but by our relatedness," end of quote? Will more signs create a greater sympathy? Is not our weak suggestion needed only for those content with their own hopelessness? Others may lead others to him, but he finds his problem in making, quote, "gladness, hope, and fortitude flow from his page," end of quote, rather than in arranging that our hearts be there to receive it. The first is his duty, the last ours. A devotion to an end tends to undervalue the means. A power of revelation may make one more concerned about his perceptions of the soul's nature than the way of their disclosure. Emerson is more interested in what he perceives than in his expression of it. He is a creator whose intensity is consumed more with the substance of his creation than with the manner by which he shows it to others. Like Petrarch, he seems more a discoverer of beauty than an imparter of it. But these discoveries, these devotions to aims, these struggles toward the absolute, do not these in themselves impart something, if not all, of their own unity and coherence, which is not received as such at first, nor is foremost in their expression? It must be remembered that truth was what Emerson was after, not strength of outline or even beauty, except in so far as they might reveal themselves, naturally, in his explorations towards the infinite. To think hard and deeply and to say what is thought, regardless of consequence, may produce a first impression, either of great translucence or of great muddiness. But in the latter, there may be hidden possibilities. Some accuse Brahms' orchestration of being muddy. This may be a good name for a first impression of it, but if it should seem less so, he might not be saying what he thought. The mud may be a form of sincerity which demands that the heart be translated rather than handed around through the pit. A clearer scoring might have lowered the thought. Carlyle told Emerson that some of his paragraphs didn't cohere. Emerson wrote by sentences or phrases rather than by logical sequence. His underlying plan of work seems based on the large unity of a series of particular aspects of a subject, rather than on the continuity of its expression. As thoughts surge to his mind, he fills the heavens with them, crowds them in if necessary, but seldom arranges them along the ground first. Among classroom excuses for Emerson's imperfect coherence and lack of unity is one that remembers that his essays were made from lecture notes. His habit, often in lecturing, was to compile his ideas as they came to him on a general subject in scattered notes, and when on the platform to trust to the mood of the occasion to assemble them. This seems a specious explanation, though true to fact. Vagueness is at times an indication of nearness to a perfect truth. The definite glory of Bernard of Cluny's celestial city is more beautiful than true, probably. Orderly reason does not always have to be a visible part of all great things.